we have two items with the Finance Committee. The first is 289-22. It's the Community Preservation Committee recommending appropriation of $3 million in CPA funding, with $2,373,470.71 coming from unrestricted funds, and the remaining $626,529.29 to come from prior year undesignated funds. And this is for the development and construction of the 100% affordable housing renovation reuse at the former West Newton Armory site. So either Ms. Kreitzer or Ms. Berman would be beginning the show here. Who's on first?
So I think we're going to start with the CPA funding, and actually I'm going to hand it over to Jennifer Malinsky as our new chair of the CPC and be doing the presentation tonight.
Well, Laura prepared a lovely presentation, so she's taken most of the work here. Laura, if you wouldn't mind sharing it, I can just walk through the project very quickly, and I know Amanda can answer.
Can I have permission to share my screen, please?
Laura, if you could just go to the next slide, and we can begin there. As I think you all know, the city purchased the former Armory in 2021 for use as a 100% affordable housing development. Under a competitive RFP process, Metro West Collaborative and Civico Development were chosen to develop the project. So the project includes 43 units of affordable housing, which all serve people under 60% of area median income, and 15 of those units serve people under 30% of area median income, which is really quite significant and remarkable. The project will preserve the front portion of the historic structure for community and office space, and the project is following a passive house design. So CPC voted to recommend $3 million of CPA funds from our unrestricted funds. As this slide notes, there were some CPA funds given in 2020 for part of the environmental study of $21,000, but this is for a $3 million total. And on the next slide, I think you can see that the $3 million is pretty well leveraged by lots of other sources, including low-income housing tax credit, CDBG, home inclusionary zoning funds, to name a few, state resources, among others, for a total project budget of nearly $28 million. And right now the project is in the pre-development stage. The timeline anticipates construction beginning in 2025 and occupancy by fall of 2026. That's it. Happy to answer any questions I can, or to refer to other people here who can.
I think it would be helpful if we could ask, I'm not sure who the right person to address this is to just walk through, if I could put it as the financial model a bit. I see all the different sources and uses of funds, but I think it would be important for everybody to understand exactly, with these dollars and specifically to the developer, what dollars the developer is going to have to pay interest on, and how exactly this bears out to be financially viable for them. And also which dollars are just basically, essentially like a gift or a payment from us. I noticed that in certain exhibits in the materials, some of these different sources of funds were referred to, I believe, as soft debt or some other phrase like that, but it's really not. I mean, it's a payment as far as I understand it. So I think unpacking that a bit and making it very plainly understood would be helpful. And I think along with that, if you could also address how these specific dollar amounts were landed on from different sources of funds, that would be helpful as well. Like why X number from here and Y number from there, beyond just this is what we had available.
Is this the page that you're looking for?
That wasn't the page I was looking for, but this might, that might work. You have the first, I thought it would be easier. It's the very first page under project financing, which looks a lot like this. It's just not in color.
Okay.
And it also gives you the cost per unit of each source of funding. So I found that helpful because it really broke it down.
Yeah, I did too, and it actually struck me the cost per unit was higher than, at least higher than an average cost per unit that I remember from projects of years past being within the realm of typical, recognizing that construction costs and the economic realities that we're living in are far different
Right.
than, you know, even just a few years ago.
All right, so I'd be happy to walk through this in a little bit more detail. So I think that the questions that were asked were around interest and also about how we arrived at these amounts. And you'll have to excuse me, my internet connection isn't great, so I'm going to turn off my video, but hopefully you can still hear me. Okay, so just starting with the question on interest. So the equity that the project would generate through the federal low-income housing tax credit and the state low-income housing tax credit these are equity amounts, so those would not require interest payments. Under the debt section, we have the first mortgage, which is a traditional first mortgage, which we arrive at that amount by underwriting the amount of rent that the property can generate, which obviously in a deeply affordable project is relatively low. So the maximum supportable mortgage amount that we felt we could support, given the affordability, was $4.8 million. And that will come with, obviously we will pay interest on that because that will be a traditional mortgage. The soft debt sources that we have listed here, we like to call them the alphabet soup of soft sources available through DHCD, the Department of Housing and Community Development, through the state. And each of these programs has its own requirements and also its limits on the amount of financing available to each project. So we have basically underwritten the maximum amount of soft debt from the State Department that we can, within their specified limits, to arrive at these various amounts under the different programs. On the uses side, we have our construction cost estimate and our various reserves. Obviously, I think someone noted a second ago how difficult a construction environment it is right now. So these numbers could certainly change as design progresses and as the construction market continues to change. But this was our best estimate based on relative projects that we have available to us. And we sort of, after maxing out the equity and the soft sources through the state and our permanent loan, and arriving at our uses of funds, the remaining gap was the $5.16 million request to the City of Newton. So I hope that answers most of the questions. Happy to answer additional questions if you have them.
Madam Chair, can I just ask a couple
Yes,
clarifying questions in response to that?
Please.
Okay, thank you. So the $4.8 million mortgage, you arrived at that on the basis of what you expect you can collect in rent and therefore what you think you can afford to pay. Is that accurate?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. And how does that math work with a rapidly changing interest rate environment?
Right. So that is something that we're going to have to monitor closely. In the early stages of underwriting, we do build in cushion into our interest rate. But I think you all probably are aware how quickly the interest rate environment is changing. This is underwritten with a fair amount of cushion. Our, operating expenses are based on well-developed understanding of what the costs will be to operate a property of similar size and scale. And our rents will be based on the HUD specified income limits. So those two are, relatively well-known amounts at this stage, but certainly keeping an eye on interest rates.
Okay, and then what happens if the construction costs end up far exceeding what is budgeted here?
Right, so we have, a number of tools at our disposal, and I'll just remind everyone that we are in the very, very early stages here, so things will change over time as design is developed and as, many things change. But we can try to leverage additional low-income housing tax credit equity. Sometimes the state might be able to help us with additional funding if we get into a situation where we max out all other sources. There are a number of tools sort of at our disposal that we will be leveraging as we make progress. We have great lenders who offer us competitive rates on our mortgages. And we can go out to competitive bid for our LICA tech equity, which would hopefully increase the amount per credit dollar that we could generate on that source. So there's a number of tools, and we're early in the process, and we will be managing the budget closely over time.
So given that you are early in the process and we're being asked for a couple very specific amounts of money, is there a world in which you might imagine coming back to the city to look for further sources of CPA funds or inclusionary zoning funds or what have you?
That is, of course, a situation I think we would all like to avoid, but I guess I would say that, yes, there's a chance if we've used all of the other tools available to us, and often the state will ask the city to help solve a gap if there is one. So yes, there's a chance that we may come back to you later, which I think is not unusual in this work, but something we would work to avoid.
Okay, and then one more question for me, and then I'll be quiet for a bit. The cushion on the mortgage and interest calculation, can you tell us how large that cushion is?
I can. So typically, we underwrite anywhere from 75 basis points to 150 basis points in cushion. And I'm trying to pull up the exact number now, but I would expect for it to be in that range.
And this is, so I understand, I'm not asking to criticize, simply to understand. Should the numbers come back, within that range, such that there is a cushion and what you anticipate having to pay in interest payments is less, what the rents are going to be, what happens to that delta, those excess or unspoken $4 in that event?
Right. So if we end up in a scenario where we have over budgeted, which, in this environment, I would say is unlikely, we would go back to our various lenders, and it would probably be a negotiation among, the city of Newton and DHCD to see, which sources we could essentially reduce if we end up in that position.
Okay. Thank you. I'll be quiet for now and yield to my colleagues who have some questions. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to take, I think I should take folks from the committees first. So in order, it's John Oliver, Councilor Oliver, Councilor Gentile, and Susan's iPhone. Is that you, President Albright? If not, I'm going to skip over to members of the committee. So Councilor Oliver.
Great. Excuse me. Thank you, Madam Chair. I will go fairly quickly here. I think Councilor Grossman did a great job with the opening questions there. In reading through the packet, there were just a couple of open questions from my perspective that remain. I see in this summary, it's called out as passive house at 41,500. And I'm assuming that there is a very specific line item that perhaps I missed in the 100 pages or so that I read over the weekend. Can you help me understand, or maybe it's someone from Civico who could help me understand that line item as it is different to the construction line item of the 21, basically the $21 million, please? Like what's in the passive house number versus what's in the construction number for passive house?
Thank you. Ms. Madden, can you answer that question? I assume it's some sort of grant.
Yes, absolutely. So, so the passive house use sources, that are shown in the sources column of 41,500, those are mass save incentives through the passive house certification program. So they offer a per unit incentive for both a feasibility study and also a per unit incentive for a pre-certification. So that would be a source coming into the project because we are pursuing the passive house certification, and there are wonderful grant sources available. And then on the uses side, our construction costs would assume passive house construction, and we have a very highly qualified architect who knows how to create drawings and write specifications that are in line with the passive house program. So our construction cost number would include those costs.
Great, thank you, and I appreciate that. And this is I have a couple of questions that fall under the heading of seeking to understand the project, because I think it's a fantastic project. I'm just trying to wrap my head around how this will work after construction for these couple of questions. How does ownership of the property work? Like obviously there's a management company who's going to run the facility, but I'm curious who retains ownership of the property?
And again, if Caitlin wants to follow up with explaining more from the management perspective, but the city will retain ownership of the property. This is going to be a lease to Metro West Civico. And we are, to be quite honest, I forget where we are exactly in the process of seeking special legislation to move it to a 99-year lease from a 65-year lease, but clearly a very long-term lease where Metro West Civico is actually managing the property. And I do prefer if Caitlin explains the management structure, since that will be under their purview and responsibility.
So Metro West CD, as a long-term lessor of the property, we would engage third-party professional management for the day-to-day, rent collection and management component of the property, but we would be physically present on site. So our staff would be there in the building every day. We would also have our resident services coordinator available in the building to meet with residents. And we would have kind of, an open door policy for any residents who needed assistance while we were there. But we will have professional third-party management and on-site presence with our entire office, which is very rare. And would be long-term partners and making sure that the building is well managed and maintained.